Hi, I'm Mark Regev.
And I'm Ruthie Bloom.
Welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic.
And please like and subscribe to this podcast and to JNS TV and to jns.org.
Ruthie, it's been a week since we last got together and a lot has happened. How would you summarize the week that has passed?
I would say that not a lot has happened, actually. A lot is supposed to be happening that has not happened. Okay, Iran and Hezbollah had the whole country doing two things. One, joking about preparing for Armageddon, and the other sort of half preparing for it in the sense that people are buying supplies or batteries or whatever.
Hang on. I mean, I live in this country too. And I agree with the joking and the mocking and the black humor. That's very Israeli. That's part of our resilience. But I'm not sure I saw panic. Did you actually see panic buying?
No. I didn't see panic. I'll tell you, I didn't see panic because after the first couple of nights when there was all these warnings and people were wondering what's going to happen, and again, there were lots of rockets and drones in the north and the south, but in the center where there was this fear that we were going to be blitzed, it didn't happen. And once it didn't happen, it was like, okay, I ate all the tuna fish in my stock. So what, do I go buy some more?
But I don't understand, Ruthie. You said you were perturbed about the situation.
Very.
But we didn't have a massive retaliation so far, not from Hezbollah or from Iran.
We shouldn't have waited to retaliate or for them to retaliate. I hate that word. They launched a vicious war on us. We don't need to retaliate. We need to beat them. We need to destroy Hezbollah like we're destroying Hamas. We need to bomb Iran.
Stop, Ruti, because when you say we need, the government of Israel, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Defense, the Army Chief of Staff, have articulated as part of our policy, our goals in this war is to destroy Hamas's military machine in Gaza and to destroy its political control over the Gaza Strip. And as well as getting the hostages out, they are the goals articulated by the Israeli leadership for this war. No one, except for you until now, has actually said the goal of this war should be destroying Hezbollah. That is to significantly expand what has been said by the Israeli leadership. The Israeli leadership has said we can't go back to October 6th in the north. We can't have Hezbollah on the border, eyeballing the Israelis who live on the border, who are fearing an October 7th type attack with Hezbollah storming across the border and trying to kill Israeli citizens, like happened in the communities around Gaza. But no one has articulated what you've just said, is that Hezbollah has to be destroyed. My understanding of the goal is to push Hezbollah back from the border.
I'm aware that nobody has articulated it. I'm talking about what I think we need to do, and if we don't, then the best we can hope for, which is bogus, is to have Hezbollah move a few kilometers inward, and then no Israeli who lives in the north will go back home because they won't trust it, and rightly they won't trust it. And what we need to do, we should have already been bombing Beirut, in my opinion. Now, it is possible that the reason this hasn't been articulated, there are a few reasons it could be. One could be we don't have the arms, we don't have the manpower, and we're not actually capable of doing that. Now, I wouldn't want to say that, and I certainly wouldn't want to tell the enemy that. But I've heard people I really trust, former military people, who say, yes, we do have the capability. That's one. The other is we saw on October 7th, that deterrence in this particular way by saying, every once in a while we have a flare-up, we deal with it, and then we have a ceasefire. That doesn't fly anymore. And Iran got into the act in April by directly launching missiles and drones at Israel, and they were all intercepted because Washington intervened and said, pull a little, do a little, put on a show, we'll intercept it, and then you're done, But you know what? We can't be done. Hezbollah is attacking us all the time. And I'm sorry, just because it isn't in Tel Aviv. Do you think those people are not Israelis? The people in Metula and in Kiryat Shmona, they're not Israelis. They don't equal people who live in Tel Aviv. Yes, they do.
Of course they do. But I want to say to you as someone who was an Israeli soldier in the infantry following the first Lebanon war, I spent a significant amount of time in Lebanon and going in and out of Lebanon in the early 80s. And then I was the spokesman for the government at the time of the Second Lebanon War. And I think policy goals that are articulated by Israeli leadership have to be realistic. And I think the assumption is Gaza is small. Gaza, we can actually go in there and take out Hamas and destroy their military machine and end their political rule. But I think when we look at Lebanon, there was an attempt in 1982 to try to change Lebanese politics, and it didn't turn out well for Israel.
No, it didn't.
And I think the assumption is in Lebanon that they'd be fighting in Lebanon, and in the end, there will be an arrangement. Maybe better than the current status quo, but there'll be an arrangement. And if you can reach that arrangement or something close to it without having to have Beirut destroyed and missiles fall on Tel Aviv, surely that's a preferable outcome. And that's
Not surely. No. I totally disagree. Because I'll say, you say it's not a good outcome. It's not a good outcome if we end up with some piece of paper after a lot of people were killed. No, that's a terrible outcome. But what we should have done, in my opinion, after these last assassinations, one of which we did not take credit for, which is fine, but whatever, are assassinating a lot of top military Hamas and Hezbollah leaders, is we shouldn't have lost the momentum. We lost momentum by saying, okay, now we're waiting for Iran to attack, and we are building up our defenses. We're ready to defend, and we're ready to attack if need be. And America moved warships in, defense. We have to be on the offense. This is the Middle East. They don't take us seriously. They have seen us as weakened. They see the Israeli public, some of the Israeli public demonstrating, just get the hostages back and let's end the war and end the war now. We're coming close to finishing the war in Gaza. But the thing is that we can't say, well, okay, we did for the last 10 months. We have said, okay, we got to take care of Hamas, and then we'll deal with the north. But as you see, all that is doing is getting us more drones, more rockets. This is dangerous. We cannot just sit back and wait and say, oh, now it turns out Iran might not be attacking. Too bad. I hope, and what the other thing I'm hoping is that all this quiet before the storm is precisely because Israel does have plans, and they are ready. We are ready to use them and do something very major simultaneously in Iran and in Lebanon.
So I'm sure we have plans. I'm sure we have operational plans. I'm sure we have the capability too. The question, is it smart? Is it clever to preempt? And this goes back to things that you're familiar with. Goes back to the Cold War. You know, people say, well, the Russians can do a sneak attack any day. Let's preempt, right? Let's hit all their targets in Russia first and deny them the ability to attack us. And in retrospect, the Cold War ended in a different way and in a more peaceful way. And so the whole idea that you have a threat and therefore eliminate the threat.
Different. It's not the same thing.
Sometimes you have to
not
manage.
Not the same.
You have to manage
the Six-Day War. No, use the Six-Day War as an example. Russia and the United States, I'm sorry, there were not missiles flying into New York City.
But the goal in the Six-Day War was not to destroy Egypt. The idea was to destroy the Egyptian forces based in Sinai, ready to attack us. That's preemption.
Okay. And Hezbollah is Iran's army that happens to have ensconced itself
in Lebanon. But do you seriously believe, I'm asking you a tough question, that we have the right to do it, that Hezbollah are terrible? You don't have to convince me of either. Of course, we have the right to do it, and of course, Hezbollah is terrible and it's a threat and so forth. But do you believe that it's a rational policy goal to say we will destroy completely Hezbollah in Lebanon? And if the answer to that question is negative, as I believe it is, then you're going to have to come out of this with some sort of arrangement. And that arrangement will be better for Israel. And if you can achieve such an arrangement before going and having missiles fall on Tel Aviv, it's surely preferable.
You have to restore deterrence. We have not restored the deterrence we didn't even have, and we thought we did, as October 7th showed us. And I'll tell you, here's the thing. We spend, and we have even spent since October 7th, worrying about legitimacy, which I would like to say with air quotes. We said 10 years ago in the war in Gaza in 2014, we said, okay, it ended with a ceasefire and an agreement, and even Netanyahu has said he knew back then, and others have said this, other politicians and other generals have said, we knew at the time we should have finished the job then, but we couldn't have. And we couldn't have because we wouldn't have had legitimacy at home or abroad. Now, if the only thing that gives us legitimacy is 1,200 mutilated, dead, raped, burned Israelis and another 250 abducted ones, if that buys you legitimacy, which we saw didn't actually buy us legitimacy. Now we're accused of starving Gaza. Lies, all blood libels. We didn't even get legitimacy. The point is this. We have to worry more about Jewish lives, Israeli lives, not just Jewish lives, Israeli lives, all the Israelis. That means Muslim Israelis, Christian Israelis, and Jewish Israelis. We have to worry more about those lives than about currying favor and legitimacy. Yes, too bad. You know something? If we started bombing Beirut, yes, well, maybe Hezbollah, maybe the Lebanese would kick Hezbollah out of their parliament. Maybe the point is, enough with it. We don't have deterrence now.
So I disagree with that strongly. I think it was the defense minister of Israel said yesterday. He said, if Hezbollah, strikes and we respond, Beirut could look like Gaza does today. And I think the Israeli action in Gaza, where we've seen a heavy toll, Hamas has been hit hard, its leadership has been taken out, its military machine is being dismantled. As you yourself said, we're very close to victory. I think Israeli operations in Gaza are crucial, not just in the goal of destroying Hamas, which, as you say, moving ahead full speed, but it's also crucial that our enemies see what we will do and what we're capable of doing if they attack us and kill our people.
I believe when I see it, Mark. I've heard our defense minister say that. I know he's threatening, watch out, and we'll turn Beirut into rubble. I'll believe it when I see it. But I'll tell you one thing. Yes, they see what's happening in Gaza, but they also see how Washington is responding to what's happening in Gaza, and how Europe is responding, and how the UN is responding, and how the International Criminal Court is responding. You think that doesn't bolster them? And Iran is nervous. Iran is mainly worried about its nuclear program. That it's worried about, okay? So again, I'm not even saying you have to kill a lot of people. What about tackling? We need to be not losing the momentum, going after more facilities, going after, like we did in Yemen. That what we did in the port of Yemen was actually quite important because it sent a clear message.
And I agree. It sent a clear message. What do you do if you send a missile and you kill our people? And I think that augments, it adds to the message that comes out of Gaza to all of Israel's enemies, that we will defend ourselves with commitment, with energy, and decisively if we need to. To say, I would argue...
we need to. What do you mean, if we need to? Hold on a second. If we need to. Let me ask you something. If the drone that killed a man in Tel Aviv, the Houthi drone that killed a man in Tel Aviv, let's say it hadn't killed him.
We should have.
No. And if let's say the missile that killed 12 children in Majd al-Shams hadn't killed anybody, We have been waiting all these months. There have been many, many deadly assaults. And by the grace of God, by miracle, not more people were killed. We have to treat every one of those launches as though that amount of people.
Can I tell you, it's a bit like, and I think we've discussed this in the past, it's a bit about Roosevelt, December 1941, a day that lives in infamy. Roosevelt wanted to get into the Second World War on the side of the Allies, but he didn't have the internal legitimacy to make the effort until Pearl Harbor came along. And I think it's the same in Israel, that a war with Lebanon will a major price, both for the home command, for Israeli civilians who will be on the receiving end of Hezbollah rockets, and for the Israeli soldiers who cross the border in the north and have to fight. Now, if we have to do it, we have to do it.
Or from the air. Or from the air.
But once again, when the fighting with Lebanon is over, the idea that somehow Hezbollah will be dismantled and disarmed and that Israel will control all of Lebanon the way we control Gaza, I think that's a myth. In the end, there will have to be an arrangement. An arrangement, you've said you don't need a useless piece of paper. I agree with that. You need an arrangement which Israel will enforce, and it's up to us. If we don't enforce it, it will be eradicated, like we saw with 1701, the UN resolution that said Hezbollah shouldn't be in any part.
You know why? Because UNIFIL was supposed to enforce it.
And the known UN peacekeepers.
Israel has to be the policeman for all of these things. And when you say, no, it's not realistic, well, we're not going to destroy Hezbollah and then occupy Lebanon.
But you also don't believe it's realistic.
Wait a second, but how about we occupy our own, we occupy Israel before you talk about that. We have been we are evacuating, we are making our borders, we've shrunken our borders. And everybody sees it and everybody knows it. Our country is in really not good shape in that respect.
So the country was hit hard on October 7th, obviously.
And since and before. You're using America as an example and Pearl Harbor. We live with those Pearl Harbors. America had 9/11. When that happened, we were going through the second intifada with suicide bombings all over. And I remember when 9/11 happened, I remember saying, good, now they'll see what we're going through. But hang on. Let
me just correct you. You didn't say good that all those Americans were killed. You said good, maybe that the Americans will understand what Israel's going through.
Mark, first of all, don't put words in my mouth.
All right. But it could have been interpreted that way. It could have been interpreted that way by one of our listeners.
Second of all, Let me tell you something. The only people who seem to want dead bodies are the side that say we don't have legitimacy unless they exist. So don't tell me that I'm the one saying it was good there were dead bodies. It's my political foes are always hoping for dead bodies because otherwise there's no legitimacy. And I've been hearing this for decades. You talk about something, Americans do not live like that now. Americans live with a lot of crime and, probably terrorism is going to be hitting them inside and everything. But it's a huge country. It's huge. Now, we are a tiny country. And we live with that threat, with Pearl Harbors and 9/11s. All the time. So how can you even compare that?
But we have to still, I don't in any way diminish the threats Israel faces. Not from Iran, not from Hezbollah, not from the Houthis, not from the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, which have been firing rockets on us also every now and then. And obviously, we have serious threats. The question is, how do we best navigate what it is a very complex and challenging strategic situation? And I would argue you have to be strong and you have to be smart. And that's the winning combination. Be smart and strong. No shooting from the hip. I would say the following, once again. And I think
shooting from the hip.
Yeah, I think
waiting.
I think the Prime Minister has said it this way. He has said, we will have a new security situation in South Lebanon. It will either happen by military means or it'll happen by diplomatic means. He said that he prefers it will happen by diplomatic means. I agree with him if it's possible. And I also agree with you that it shouldn't be an empty piece of paper. Israel will have to enforce it. It'll be up to us that if there's an agreement that Hezbollah can't be south of a certain point and Hezbollah moves south, we have to be ready to shoot to kill. I agree. We can't stand for infringements of arrangements. But if anyway there's going to be an arrangement, right? I say if it's possible to achieve that same arrangement without a major war, that is preferable. If we need to fight, we will fight.
It depends what a major war is for, what the goal of the major war is for. And right now, you're right, we have a world situation. Thank you very much to the Biden administration, may I say. But we have a world situation, not just in the Middle East. There's China, there's Russia. We've got a situation that is really headed for a world war. But sometimes they're necessary. World War II was necessary. So to say no, and if we can do things by diplomatic means, you know something? We've tried that over and over and over. And let me tell you something else. The horror, the shock and horror that left-wing Israelis, and of course, outside of Israel, say when anyone in Israel suggests that we're going to have to reoccupy Gaza and turn it actually make it bloom again. Unlike the animals who took it over, the Hamas terrorists who took it over and turned it into a killing machine. And the horror that, oh my goodness, and take it over, and the word occupy becomes such a bad word. We would save Gaza by doing that. We wouldn't hurt it. And we have to stop with the pre-October 7th mind frame that got us into this situation in the first place.
So I agree with the Prime Minister when he said in Congress, right, that we have no goal to resettle Gaza. That was implied in what you just said. He said it.
Yep.
He said we will have
more
to have,
than once,
in the
yes.
foreseeable future, we'll have to have overriding security control. But he'd like to see the Palestinians of Gaza rule themselves. And all we ask is that they have a regime, a government that doesn't attack Israel, that doesn't call for Israel's destruction. And those goals are doable because they are minimalist goals. Once again,
they're not doable if your goal is to have Palestinians rule themselves. Yes, if they are reborn, or the new babies born go through a different education system.
I agree. He said that. He said demilitarization and de-radicalization.
Right, but demilitarization is one thing, which, by the way, we haven't even managed to do in Judea and Samaria very well, demilitarization. We got a mini Gaza going on in Jenin over there, but
we are dealing with it.
We are. Thank God we're dealing with it, but we let it get so bad.
I think if you look for perfect solutions, you're never going to find them.
No. I'm not talking about perfect, okay? None of what I'm saying has anything to do with perfect. De-radicalization
is a process.
Not over, it's a process.
Correct.
So, okay, and I know that Netanyahu said that, and I think he probably even means it or believes it himself, okay? Yes, I'm not in agreement with him on that about resettling Gaza. I didn't think we should have withdrawn from Gaza in the first place. That's a different issue.
That's a different question.
Okay, we're talking about the future. But de-radicalization under these conditions where you have, especially when you have now talk of, the Palestinian Authority or a revitalized Palestinian Authority could rule Gaza, or some kind of Palestinian entity. That is nonsense. How many times do we have to hear it? I would trust... Yes.
Equally nonsense, though, is the idea that Israeli soldiers should be patrolling the streets of Gaza, making sure that people don't park their cars illegally and beat their wives and so forth.
No.
Israelis shouldn't have to do that. In other words, you need some sort of autonomous civilian rule, and that's what Netanyahu wants.
Right, but that is, you talk about you say realism.
Yeah.
That's not realistic. So we, are going to have our soldiers policing, not police. I'm not talking about taking out the garbage.
Yeah.
First of all, as we saw this week, the tunnels in the Philadelphia corridor exposed. We know that Egypt has been enabling weapons and concrete and all that, and we know that we are in big trouble if we don't keep control of that whole area. And that's good because Netanyahu has been extremely firm on that point, and good for him. The point, though, is that that's not enough, and Gaza is not going to, you talk about, we need, we're not going to be their dog catchers and their garbage men and all that. Right. But up until now, even that stuff, the only organizations there that took care of civil society were also terrorists. And as
the goal,
the schools, they're also terrorists. So I have a question.
It's a bit like Japan after the destruction they experienced at the end of the Second World War, and the same with Germany, where people understood, look what Hitler brought upon us, right? It took a lot of, at the beginning when Hitler was winning, they were all for him, yeah? But when Hitler brought destruction upon Germany, the German people
were angry about it.
Were angry. And so it's possible, I'm not saying definitely, but I think there's a possibility that when this is over, and Hamas as a military machine and as a political government of Gaza is no more, then you will see Palestinians, not because they like us, but they see what Hamas's path brought them, that there will be a chance for something new to emerge.
Okay, you know why I don't believe that so much? Because the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria who have witnessed what is going on in Gaza, they have seen, and they see what Israel has done, and they see what Israel is doing with them. They all support Hamas. Even after October 7th, they still all support Hamas, the October 7th massacre, and would vote tomorrow for Hamas. And in Gaza, the trouble is that other than very little children, most of the civilians there, yes, I will concede that they've been brainwashed. They weren't born that way. They've been brainwashed, but they've been very successfully brainwashed. These are people who joined in on beating up any time a hostage was taken in on October 7th, was brought into Gaza. They all, civilians, beat them up. When hostages were released, they were throwing rocks at the Red Cross vans, taking them back to the border so that they could return to Israel. You are living in fantasy land if you can imagine that. Okay, now, what I do think is if that we were able to rescue the hostages and carry Sinwar's head on a spike throughout Gaza, march it around, and warn everybody else that that's their fate, they might be terrified into switching into, I wouldn't say de-radicalizing, but realizing that they're done. Maybe. But the chances of that happening are pretty slim.
But it's not going to happen because I don't think Israel decapitates people, puts them on a spike and walks around the street with their head.
Which is why we are at a disadvantage in the Middle East, Mark.
So I think it's fantasy land to talk about that sort of solution. I think it's fantasy land, to use your word, to talk about destroying completely Hezbollah in Lebanon. I think it is not fantasy land to talk about winning the war in Gaza and reaching a new situation in Lebanon where Israelis can return to the northern border. I think it's important that goals be realistic and be attainable. You create great problems when you present a goal that is impossible to be realized. And once again,
But what happens to a goal that is realistic and you realize it, and all it does is enable your enemy to rearm and rebuild tunnels.
But once again, that first of all, in Gaza, the goal is destroy Hamas and they won't be in charge afterwards, and that we continue for the foreseeable future with a security envelope that prevents them from rearming and reemerging. That's the goal in Gaza. In Lebanon, different place, different country, different sort of provocation, different sort of threat.
And Iran, the head of the snake.
But you've got to be realistic. I'm of the generation that remembers the war in 82. More people remember the war in 2006. Lebanon is a more complicated kettle of fish, and policy has to be relevant to the area you're dealing with. If you just block your eyes and say it's all the same, no, it's not all the same. That is fantasy land. What is possible in Gaza is not necessarily possible in Lebanon. What is possible in Lebanon? I want to say something about former Prime Minister Olmert, who led Israel in the 2006 war, right? He was much criticized for that war, including by yourself, that Israel acted in a way that wasn't sensible, and we shot from the hip, and then we didn't think things through, and we...
No, we weren't prepared. It's because
my point
we
is
had
this.
decimated
Olmert says, to his defense,
Yes.
I believe correctly, he says, yes, but following the 2006 war, we had close to 2 decades of relative peace in the north. Now, maybe in the very violent and Middle East and the threats that Israel faces, if you can give me 2 decades of peace, how do Jewish people say on Seder night, Dayenu, it's enough? Maybe if we come out of this, because in that 2 decades, other things can happen. There can be political change in Iran. There can be political change in Lebanon. All sorts of things. If you look,
Yes, and
but let me
we're
finish the
on
point,
the
Ruti.
way.
If you look for perfect solutions today or complete solutions today, you're not going to find them. It can be a dangerous pathway towards mistakes. If you manage to find workable solutions today, you allow history to bring in other changes in the future.
We saw that a mere few years ago with the Abraham Accords. We saw that the Trump administration starved Iran of all its billions, and it was going broke, and that put a damper in its nuclear program and in its terrorist proxies. Yes, that was realistic, all right? We were on the way to that, and then Iran got appeased. And by the way, the peace and quiet that we have gotten since 2006 in Lebanon, it was a lie, because in those years we enabled Hezbollah to amass such an army and such an arsenal. And by the way, October 7th also. So the question again, I repeat, maybe it's not realistic, but how many people have to be slaughtered in order for us to say, maybe our policy hasn't been so great?
I'd like to finish optimistically with your permission, Ruti. Let's say you have a less than perfect but a workable solution in Lebanon. You might need to have more violence, more conflict to get there, but not a perfect solution which is unattainable. But you have a solution that gives you 2 decades of peace. If in the meantime, during those 2 decades, the Saudis make peace with Israel, other Arab and Muslim countries follow, you change the political dynamic in the region, that can affect other issues too. In other words, if you're buying time, you can also use that time effectively. I agree. Everything depends on Israel being strong. Everything depends on Israel making sure that our people are safe, and we have to do that. But once again, I'm as you know, of the realist school, and I believe we have to do what is possible, what is attainable, and not have goals that are pie in the sky. And I know you disagree with me.
Well, I'll just end by saying maybe that means that fantasy is the new realism. And on that cheerful note,
I look forward to speaking to you again next week.
Exactly. And again, please like and subscribe to jns.org, JNS TV, and to Israel Undiplomatic, of course.